A word of warning to spontaneous travelers. Keep in mind of religious holidays. You might find yourself in a bind you could have avoided with a bit of research. I didn't know anything about Holy Week or Antigua before I came to Guatemala. Since the country is predominantly Catholic, Holy Week is the most important religious celebration of the year, commemorating the Passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It also showcases the creative skill of Guatemalan artisans. Elaborate processions wind through the cobblestone streets, adorned with colorful floral carpets. This meant roadblocks, heavy traffic, and large crowds. I wanted to extend my stay in Antigua, but the entire city seemed to be fully booked. In efforts to escape the crowds and take in more of Guatemala's volcanic landscape, I headed to Lake Atitlan. I decided to stay in Panajachel for 3 days and take trips to the nearby villages. In hindsight, I would have rather stayed in one of these quiet lakeside villages instead, because Panajachel is quite busy. On my first day, I took the ferry to the popular village of San Marcos. The scenery was indeed beautiful, and the climate was much cooler than expected. I went to a cafe to have a flat white and sat at a table with a girl writing in her journal. She had large brown eyes that looked even larger behind her reading glasses. Her shoulders and arms were remarkably well-toned. Her name was Daisy. She was an acrobat for the circus and on a 3-month break from touring. She said even though this was her time off, she was still training for 2 to 4 hours a day. During circus tours, she'd train for 6 to 8 hours a day. It's a full-time job, she said. Daisy had a rare condition where her joints were not sufficient enough to support her body. The doctors said she'd be in a wheelchair by her 30s. She remarked with satisfied pride she was now 32 years old and a contortionist for the circus. I asked how on earth did she manage to overcome her condition. She replied, with sheer will. She then added that she spent a lot of time educating herself about the body's range of motion and certain exercises to strengthen and improve flexibility. I asked if she used weights. She replied, sometimes, but not often. Body weight exercises were enough for a solid foundation. That was a relief to me, since they're highly compatible with my life on the road. I finished my coffee, said goodbye to Daisy, and walked to a dock by the lake to sit quietly and take in my surroundings. There were people paddleboarding, kayaking, and a few local fishermen in the water. A young woman was singing in the shade as I approached the dock. Her name was Nora. She was from Canada and was rehearsing for a performance later that evening. I asked if my presence disturbed her practice. She smiled and shook her head no. I stripped to my bathing suit, laid down on the floorboards, and closed my eyes. Nora sang in a soothing, deep tenor. The breeze from the lake and her beautiful voice washed over me. She had long chestnut brown hair and porcelain skin that stretched over high cheekbones. This was her last day in Guatemala before returning to Canada. She wanted to move to the West Coast, maybe Vancouver, to connect with the whales and enrich her singing with whale energy. It would never occur to me to move to a place for a similar reason, but it wasn't my place to question this lovely stranger. I reflected for a moment and noticed her voice actually resembled that of a whale. Wonderfully so. Nora finished her rehearsal and carefully packed up her singing equipment. One of the items was a motorcycle battery. She used it to charge her music equipment with jumper cables. The sharp contrast between her gentle singing voice and the tools in her bag was striking. She asked about my ethnicity. I replied I was Chinese. She told me I was beautiful. I thanked her for the compliment and told her she was beautiful as well. We kissed goodbye. I stayed on the dock for another hour, looking out at the lake as ferries passed by. It was chillier than I expected. I put my clothes back on. elegant villas and bohemian-looking bungalows nestled in the hillside. I walked towards the public pier to catch the ferry back to Panajachel and stopped at a juice stand. Aside from juices and smoothies, the owner also sold tamales. Tamales are steamed packets of corn dough filled with savory or sweet ingredients and wrapped in corn husks. I ordered one with chicken and had a mango pineapple orange smoothie. A local man sat next to me at the counter and ordered a green juice. I was surprised at the bill when it was time for me to pay. I told the owner I didn't have enough cash for both the meal and the ferry. He lowered the price by 10 quetzales, which was kind of him. I wondered if he charged foreigners more and gave me the price he charged for locals. The owner of my hotel was half Nicaraguan, half Guatemalan. He had 2 children, a toddler son and a newborn, which his wife carried in a sling around her body. Breakfast was included, and I opted for the chapin option, which included scrambled eggs, black beans, sausages, toast, and coffee. Chapin and chapina is the informal way Guatemalans refer to themselves. I had a short conversation with a young couple on vacation. The man was Colombian, and the woman was Peruvian. They lived in Panama City and met at work. I asked if they liked living in Panama. They replied no, but they liked their jobs and their salaries. To my surprise, the Colombian man's dream was to learn Mandarin and go to Shenzhen, China, to work in the tech field. The Wi-Fi at my hotel was slow, so I went to a cafe nearby to do some work. At around 2:30, I began to feel tired and decided to go back to my room to rest. While paying my bill, the barista asked if I was sleepy. I replied yes and asked if afternoon siestas were common in Guatemala. He said no. Most people worked 12 hours a day. He was a business owner, so he worked more, but he liked it. His name was Ricardo. He came from 4 generations of coffee farmers, but the beans in his cafe didn't come from his family farm because their quality wasn't good enough. I asked how he came to open this coffee shop. He replied he used to work in a hotel restaurant. One day, the manager asked if he'd be interested in the hotel coffee shop instead. At the time, he didn't know anything about coffee and thought it would be a good opportunity to learn something new. After gathering enough knowledge, he decided to open his own business. Unfortunately, he didn't own the building itself because Panajachel was a tourist destination and properties were expensive. He had big plans for expanding his business. His mother once went to the church, and the priest revealed her son would achieve great things in life. Ricardo didn't go to church, but he prayed and studied the Bible in his free time. I asked if crime was a problem in this area. He replied no. It was generally safe. 10 years ago, there was an incident where gangsters killed some bus drivers who didn't pay their bribes. The local indigenous community captured the gangsters and burned them alive. After that, there was very little gang activity around Lake Atitlan. However, Ricardo remarked he never knew who he was serving at the cafe. Some customers looked very rich, arriving in sports cars and covered in gold jewelry, but he was never asked to bribe anyone. He served their coffee and only spoke when he was spoken to. I asked how old he was. Ricardo replied, 24, but he knew he looked older. He said, Guatemalans age much faster than Asians. He served Asian customers in their 40s who looked like they were in their 20s, while Guatemalans in their 50s looked like they were in their 70s. Ricardo spoke Spanish, English, and one of the 20 Mayan languages. I told him I loved the way local women dressed. He laughed and thanked me for complimenting his culture. 3 days later, I left for Guatemala City. The drive took about 3 hours through winding mountainous roads. At one point, the driver stopped at a fruit stand to buy a mango, which I thought was an odd choice. He maneuvered the steering wheel with one hand and ate the mango with the other hand, peel and all, like you'd eat an apple. I've never seen anyone eat a mango like this before. I only stayed in the capital for one night. I had an early morning flight back to Mexico City the next day. I went to the large shopping mall in Zone 10 to get something to eat. I'm always amazed at the popularity of shopping malls outside the United States, where they seem to be a thing of the past. I had a simple meal of grilled fish and salad. The vegetables were much appreciated. Afterwards, I went for a walk in a small park. There was a sign that said, "No campfires, no alcohol, no drugs, and no guns." My neighborhood felt extremely safe. There were cameras and armed security guards at several entrance points. I wondered if they ever had to deal with an intruder. That night, I read Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf by Edward Albee. The story explores the bitter struggles of a married couple, George and Martha. Late one night, they invite a younger couple over for drinks, but the evening descends into a vicious game of psychological warfare. As alcohol loosens inhibitions, George and Martha expose the painful secrets and illusions that hold their troubled marriage together. The Guatemalan sun dipped below the horizon. It was the final chapter of this trip before returning to Mexico City, where this whole adventure began over a year ago. A deep feeling of contentment washed over me. Traveling in solitude is a beautiful experience. Along the course of this journey, I spent 2 weeks in Patagonia. Find out how I spend my time alone in this video.